Hi, this is G from Energyblendz, where it's all about the energy. Today's recipe is working with kyanite. Now, kyanite comes in a kind of a layered, very soft form, and sometimes you can find clusters like this, and other times it's stabilized, where some form of material is used. Sometimes the stone is heated and the material then is absorbed, and it kind of holds all of this very soft, chalky kind of material or mineral together. Stabilization happens with a lot of soft stones. You'll see it with azurite, with chrysocolla. So with kyanite, now this I thought was an interesting piece because it's a cluster, and as you can see, I had already wrapped the base part of it. I am going to finish this in a variation of this theme, but at the moment I'm making a gift for someone, so I'm using this stabilized kyanite. Kyanite is a stone that essentially helps to release the ego, and if you understand that the ego is associated with fear and fear issues, to release that makes it possible to be much more logical and rational in your thinking. There's a greater element of calmness, and these are the aspects of kyanite that makes it such a wonderful energy to work with. This stone is also one that never stores negative energy. It never has to be cleared, and it can be used to eliminate blockages in the energy system of the body. So what I'm going to add to it is pink tourmaline, which we have my faith and my trust and this tremendous sense of love and compassion, but I'm also adding freshwater pearls. And I like pearls in general because of what they represent. You're talking about a clam that had received some kind of an irritant, and it secreted this mineral material, which is what the pearl is, and it kind of coats the irritant and transforms it into something that's wonderful. And that's why I like to work with these pearls, because they represent that aspect of changing a difficult situation into something that's a little bit more agreeable. So by adding these three elements together, what's created can best be described as a question. What useful purpose would it serve to do whatever? So what I mean by that is, this is a combination of energies that I would wear if I'm working in a group or if I'm with other people, where someone else's opinion is going to come into play, or someone else's behavior may come into play. And so whenever something like that happens, I have the option to say, I don't like what they're doing, I don't like that idea, I want to do something different. Or I might ask myself the question, what useful purpose would it serve to oppose this person? I'm going to be flexible, and I'm just going to flow with the circumstances. Now, this doesn't mean that you become an automaton and you automatically allow people to take advantage of you. What it means is that you're given an opportunity for rational, higher purpose thought that allows you to look at any given situation and determine whether you want to oppose it or you're willing to flow with it. This is a great piece if you're constantly dealing with people who are antagonistic, people who are difficult to deal with. You may find that it turns into a great comfort. It's also a great stone when you're dealing with circumstances that are beyond your control. You're in a better position to see the bigger picture and to relate or react to that situation with a little bit more rational, spiritual, higher purpose understanding. So what I'm going to do with this piece, since this kyanite is actually pretty heavy, so if you'll notice that there are some blemishes, and that often happens with very soft pieces that are stabilized, I'm going to do a wrap that will help to minimize the appearance of some of these, what might be considered a blemish. And because it's a heavier piece, I'm using 20 gauge wire, which is a little bit heavier. And I have this idea of doing a spiral wrap around it that starts with twisting the wire twice. And because this is a heavier wire, sometimes it's nice to have pliers available. And maybe even to get the wire where you want it to be before you lay it up against the piece. And what I'm going to do is wrap the wire around the bottom part of the piece So that here is the first part where I'm going to hold the piece in place. Now when I start twisting this wire, I'm going to go to the opposite side. I'm going to take this lower wire and twist it to the opposite upper and do 1 or 2 twists to hold it in place. And then I'm going to take this upper wire and twist it with the lower, making sure that this area on the bottom is somewhat parallel, because that's going to create a design element that I want to take advantage of. So since I'm going to be wrapping this wire around the piece, I'm going to be doing a lot of twisting of this wire. So both of them are going to get twisted, and when I wrap this wire around the piece, it's actually going to be in a kind of a parallel. Both lines are going to move parallel around the piece. Always with a space in mind, because I need to put those beads and the pearls somewhere that's going to show a nice design element. So I can begin now to bend and shape the wire around the front of where this is going to be. And since I'm going to wrap this all the way around the piece, I need to twist more wire and make a longer tail. Now, ordinarily, I would hold this wire with my pliers, but since this wrap requires that I hold the wire against the piece, I'm going to have to be mindful that when I'm done to come along with the pliers and straighten out any wire that was crimped because I wasn't able to hold it. And that happens sometimes. The wire gets a little bit bendy when it becomes difficult to hold it at the point where the twisting is taking place. So what I'm doing is, slide that up a little bit, I'm beginning to get a sense of how this wire is going to twist all the way around this piece. So by eyeballing it, I can get a sense of where this is going to show up at the top, making sure that I don't have too long. I don't want to have to unravel if I can avoid it. So let's see where I am here. Almost there. Almost to the point where I need to be. I'm going to be able to attach these two tails the way I did at the bottom. So I'm going to, again, the lower part to the upper part, twisting it. And the lower part, twisting it. And then ultimately, I have, let's see, I can, under here, a wire across the front and a wire across the back, giving us that parallel banding once again. And then I'm going to tighten this as tight as I can to hold it in place. And now, since this wire is pretty much on this piece, I can allow myself to let go a little bit and just kind of pull the wire and tighten it with my pliers. Pull it out and tighten it. And what I'm going to do here is then simply make a band that will come over and attach to the other side, with the idea in mind that this piece is going to help lock up here. Okay, that's where I want it to be. And then this tail is going to be bigger yet, because this is where we're either going to attach a chain or attach a jump ring. Depends. You don't always have to attach a jump ring to a piece, but by sacrificing that particular structure, you then create an opportunity for a piece not to exactly lay flat. Okay, so let me attach this side. I think I'll do one more twist. I'm always trying to come up with a different way to wrap a piece. Sometimes coming up with creative ideas becomes a lot easier when you decide to use scraps. Some of the most interesting wraps I've ever done was using leftover wire and just piecing it together. All right, so now I want to tighten this as much as I can and simply wrap this end piece around this wire, if I can get some cooperation. All right. You could, if this tail was long enough, wrap this all the way around across the front of the piece if you wanted to. I don't think I have enough wire for that, and I'm really not interested in that kind of a design element, just enough to hold this portion of the wrap in place. So now I'll cut off the excess and fold this little end underneath. Now I can always go back later and play with it. You know, that's really the fun of it at the end, is when you get to play with everything. Now I'm going to add this piece, attach this piece down, and when I attach this piece, since this is where the chain is going to loop through, I'd like to attach it perhaps in the back. I've got this one loop in the front, one loop in the back. So I think that this top loop is enough. Now maybe I'll do one more. And then I can attach this in the back. So I have one attachment in the front, one attachment in the back, so it's a little bit more balanced. And it doesn't really matter what goes on in the back anyway. I did have a person years ago, a friend of mine I was working with, I had made a piece for him, and he came to work wearing the piece, but the face of it, where all the bead and stonework was turned towards his body. And I pointed that out to him, and he said, "Oh yeah, I did that on purpose, because it feels like the energy needs to be turned towards me instead of going outward." Okay, I hadn't thought of that before. It seems like an interesting concept. But then you miss all the work that's done in the front, and you expose all of those aspects of the wrap or the stone itself that might not be considered perfect. But then if you're the mind where everything is perfect, that every blemish is not a blemish but simply an aspect of the character of the individual, then that's the truth of it. All right, so here we have two bands, and later, let me turn you under a little bit more. Later, when I finish after putting the beads on, I can always go in and then start playing with it. That's really the fun of it at the end, when you start molding and shaping and getting it to where you want it to be. So before I tighten this, which ultimately I'll crimp this, I want to add the beadwork. So these are the beads that I picked. I have some gold-filled beads, And for those of you who've been watching, you know I like to add gold as kind of an example of balance, adding a little bit of yang or male energy to the female and yin energy of the silver. And I like the idea of this notion of adding pepper in the stew. So I'm adding a little something to stimulate activity. I'm going to use a 26 gauge wire, mostly because with a lot of these, the beads and chips that are used, sometimes the holes are so tiny that it's practically impossible to get anything on. And since I'm not adding these beads to the actual wire that I'm doing the wrap with, it becomes easier then to simply use a very thin addition. It's not going to affect the wrap at all. And depending on how you do it, it really shouldn't interfere, you know, the fact that it's a thin wire shouldn't interfere with the integrity of the finished piece. So by making a good start here, tightening it up good, there we go. This way I can add my beads. Now later on I'll have to check to make sure there aren't any sharp edges. And I always like to start with a smaller bead at the end and build upwards. Hello? Sometimes these pieces have a mind of their own. Now this little bead was certainly a lot bigger at one point, and somehow it got broken. But it still has a wonderful energy, and certainly isn't that symbolic with the way life is. We have something that starts off a certain way and it gets a little broken, but yet it still works. And sometimes working with the very, very thin gauge wire, it's almost like you're sewing. It's almost like doing a little bit of embroidery. When I attach the wire that I have these beads strung onto, I still like to use the same basic rule of 3 times to make sure I get a basic stable. I mean, there are always circumstances that are a little bit different, but still in all, I like the 3 rule. That seems to hold it in place the best with the least amount of effort. And here's a nice, big, delicious. These energies really are so, so sweet. And I think what's going to happen since, let's do it this way. You know what? I wrapped the top before. Let's do the bottom this time. I think what's going to happen is that I may not have room to put the pearls at this spacing, and I'll need to do it up on top instead. So let's take advantage of the order of vibration when you're looking at chakras, and we'll have the lower heart at the bottom and the white color of spirit more towards the top. Let's see how that comes out. All right. So this one is pretty much anchored in place. And now comes an opportunity to take a look and see where I am. Okay. So I could put the freshwater pearls right there, right across that area. Or, you know what? I could do it right at the top, even better. Let's do it here. and that can potentially block a little or minimize a little of that blemish. Goes to show you, you don't always have to start off with a perfect piece all the time. You can always come up with some creative solutions for either taking advantage of a uniqueness in a piece or to hide it with some creative blending of crystal energies. And I'm thinking that maybe I don't want to add a jump ring to this piece. It's heavy enough so that the weight of it will help it to pull. All right. That wire got a little bit too bent. So I'm thinking that the weight of this piece can pull it down and minimize the need for some extra piece to be made. All right, you're getting stubborn. So it looks like I'm going to need some more gold beads. Let's see what I have. And I picked this particular pearl because it was nice and fat. But I can certainly pull out some other bigger ones and fill in this area. Let's see. I think this will lay very nicely. All right. Because these pieces are a little large and perhaps a little bit heavy, it's a good idea to wrap this around and anchor it in different parts, particularly since we're using such a light gauge wire. Right? And when you do that, sometimes you change the alignment of the way the beads will lay, and that can also create an interesting design element. Let's see what that does. All right, clearly I need a bead in the middle, and then we can lock this down. Actually, what I can do, maybe this. How about this? I have this tiny little pink tourmaline bead. Let's see what that does. A little contrast of color. And this piece is almost done. Now it's going to someone who just retired. And she was working in a place that challenged her patients every day. And what's interesting about her circumstances is that now she will continue to work at that place, but part-time. And so it seemed like a really good idea to determine whether or not this piece is going to help her develop a new perspective about this job, particularly since she's only going to be working there part-time. It could help her with her transition into a life of more leisure, And it could help her walk away from this job with a different perspective about why she was there, what lessons she needed to learn, that kind of stuff. All right, fold that over. So let's tighten this up. That will help to anchor it in. All right. Now, just to give you an idea of how this will hang, it doesn't really need a jump ring. Just one last little crimp right here with the pearl for an interesting design element. And there we have it. Kyanite that's been stabilized with sterling silver, pink tourmaline, gold-filled beads, and fresh water pearls. And this piece is designed to give you the perspective of why allow yourself to get roped into a situation if it serves no useful purpose. Always think in terms of the higher purpose, and that's what this piece helps to do. And again, this is G from Energyblendz, where it's all about the energy.